I'm going to move on to floor area ratio, FAR. This is frequently used as an alternative to height in commercial districts and other dense properties. Here, it's used primarily in your single-family districts in addition to height and lot coverage and a lot of the other regulations you already have in place. So this visual example just kind of tries to help explain what floor area ratio is trying to achieve. So I'll just focus on the middle example. It shows a 1.0 FAR. It basically means if you have a lot, you can cover the entire lot with a one-story building. Or you could take half the lot and make a two-story building. Or you could take a quarter of the lot and build a four-story building. All those circumstances all have a 1.0 FAR. So I hope that helps at least a little bit an idea of how this works. So we're just in this measurement, we're only looking at the principal structure. So again, if we're talking about single family, we're talking about the house itself, not a detached garage or a shed. This is just for the primary structure. And we're trying to, again, regulate the bulk of the building. So the feedback we receive generally from the public is that the new homes that are being built are way too big, particularly multi-story buildings, which most of the new ones are. There's also some technical problems with the code that's causing staff some concern as they get applications and trying to make sure that they're being consistent in applying the language that's there. So the way your current code works, the floor area ratio ranges from 0.25 to 0.35 depending on the lot size. There's also a minimum amount of square feet, and that basically means if you look at the lot size for 10,000 square feet or less, it's basically saying no matter how small your lot is, you can have a house that at least has 2,250 square feet, no matter what the FAR says. So that's how your current code's working. But like I said, we weren't necessarily planning on changing these numbers. What we thought would be fair is to look at how we're calculating floor area ratio. And this is just a little visual of trying to explain how it's working right now. So the main part of your home, what you just call your first or second story, is being counted at, I'll call 100%. All of the floor area in those places are being counted towards this calculation. But as far as attached garages go, only half of that floor area is being counted, which is a little surprising considering it's just as bulky as the rest of the house. But for some reason right now it's being counted at 50%. Half stories, if it meets the definition of a half story, which is complicated on its own, right now does not count towards floor area ratio at all. So we wanted to point out some of these problems, I guess technical problems with the way the language is currently written. So just a visual example, this is hopefully nobody's home here, it's just a random example, unless you're on the internet, you might be. But really tall ceilinged areas like this that might be 2 stories tall, right now we're only counting the floor area of that space, even though on the outside that would look just like a 2-story portion of a home. And we're recommending changing that. If we're truly trying to regulate the bulk of the building and the appearance of how big it is from the outside, it doesn't matter if somebody's chosen to put a floor there or leave it as an open air 2-story atrium. It looks the same from the outside. And again, hopefully this is nobody's home. This is just an example, but we have had some properties here in the city that are creatively using half stories. I think the intent of a half story was to kind of provide attic space, essentially nice usable attic space. In some cases, properties like this, especially with gambrel roofs, are meeting the definition, the technical definition of a half story and using it like any other part of the house. But that area is not being counted towards floor area ratio right now, which allows them basically to make the rest of the house even bigger. So that's kind of a problem. So what we're proposing is just to really count bulk equally and make things a lot easier and more consistent for staff as well. So what we're recommending is that you count the first and second floor just like you do now, 100%. Attached garages would also be 100%, just like any other portion of the house. And then half stories, we're just trying to simplify what is a half story and what isn't and how it counts. And basically what we're saying is if there's a space in this half story that is 5 feet or more in height, if it has conditioning, air conditioning, heat, or it provides access through a permanent staircase, this is like any other part of your house. We're going to count this at 100% if it meets those qualities. We move on to lot coverage. This is another way to control the size of development and control how much development is happening on a lot. It's basically the percentage of a lot that can be covered by a structure. It's a little different than floor area ratio. It just looks at the footprint of the building. The other thing that makes it different is it's the principal structure and the accessory structures. So this is measuring slightly different things. And the feedback we got, like most of the other ones, is that a lot of people were saying that the homes are just being built are way too large. We also heard a lot of concerns about stormwater, lots. But I just wanted to use this opportunity to point out that the city recently, I think within the last year or so, has passed regulations that deal with that issue separately from zoning. So while you may still be seeing some issues on the ground from things that have happened in the past, anything new moving forward, this should not be an issue anymore. So I just wanted to mention that here. Okay, so your current code regulations. R5 is easy. All R5 properties have 40% lot coverage. In R1, 2, 3, and 4, it depends on the size of your lot and the number of stories on your property, but it ranges from 25 to 35%. It also has kind of this minimum size, just like floor area ratio. So same concept. So no matter how small your lot is, you can have at least 1,750 square feet of that ground floor space. A lot of people felt like lot coverage was too generous. We did look at several nearby communities and other communities that we're just familiar with. I mean, really, your regulations are within a normal range. So we really didn't think they were that far out of line. I think the issues were primarily with the stormwater, which has been addressed separately. So we really didn't recommend any dramatic changes here. We did slightly reduce that deduction for the unenclosed front porches from 300 to 200 square feet. So that's as far as we went with that. So everybody can take a deep breath. We made it through site development standards. But we're going to move on to Architectural Review Board and architectural guidelines. This is much shorter than the last section, so we won't be going into as much detail. I don't think there's as much jargon and explanation quite needed here. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the Architectural Review Board and their level of authority, and just summarize the changes that were being made. So one of the biggest changes is they now have, in the new code language, they have binding authority for non-residential commercial type projects. Right now, they only have that authority in the downtown area. We're expanding that citywide, and that basically says all non-residential projects now have to go to the ARB board and receive approval before moving forward. As far as single-family projects go, we are maintaining the current system, which has an advisory role. That means all projects are reviewed, but you don't necessarily need their blessing to proceed. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but when we talked to the public, a lot of people talked about architectural guidelines, but when you pressed for more details and found out what the issues were, most of them were really about the things I just previously discussed. Setbacks, lot coverage, floor area ratio, and we feel like we've addressed a lot of those, and we've tweaked some of the guidelines, but so we felt like the advisory role was still appropriate. And as far as multifamily projects go, we maintained the current system, which has them binding review. So all multifamily projects already need approval by the ARB, and we are keeping that. So I'm just going to quickly touch on what we changed for the architectural guidelines. There's currently a preferred discouraged system. It lists elements that are preferred, lists elements that are discouraged, and each is applied kind of on a case-by-case basis by the ARB. So what we focus on as far as single family goes is attached garages, driveways, and we'll call it scale compatibility. So one of our goals was to minimize the appearance of forward-facing attached garages, particularly in neighborhoods where that is not a predominant style already. We inserted language, again, preferred type language, asking projects to push garages back as far as feasible, given the site constraints. We've asked for garage doors to either be blended in with the appearance of the homes color-wise, or that they could, have a natural wood tone. We've also talked a little bit about driveways and ways that the appearance of these driveways can be minimized, either through the use of pavers, which kind of make it look a little bit more decorative and break up that sea of concrete type appearance, or the use of, you see up here, a ribbon driveway where there's grass in the middle. Not only would that help with stormwater, but it also, again, just makes it a little bit more decorative and makes it feel less like a runway. And the last topic is the scale compatibility. This is another issue we feel like has been partially addressed by the site development standards and addressing those setbacks and things like that. But this is architecturally encouraging people to think about when you're building a 2-story home or a 2.5-story home next to a 1-story home, what can you do to make this look more like the neighborhood around it? Some of those things are exemplified by the photographs on the bottom, things like pushing the bulk of the 2nd-story mass to the back of the property a little bit, giving it a slightly less intense appearance from the street, and using roof forms that, again, break up some of that massing so you don't just have sheer 2-story walls, shed dormer roofs or clipped gables and things like that that can help make these homes more compatible with smaller neighboring properties. And commercially, we didn't have dramatic changes in this section. It already had a lot of good code language. We just kind of clarified it. We added lots of diagrams to try to help applicants understand what the expectations were, particularly now that the ARB has binding review. The only other major change we wanted to highlight here is that we've identified these particular gateway areas. The expectation is not that these completely mimic downtown Kirkwood, but that the bar would be slightly higher in these areas. They're kind of key entry points for the city, key entry points where people are getting their first impressions of the community, and we want those products to be a little bit nicer than kind of your standard commercial.